Yo, what up, Facebook? It's Mike, your mentor, for Man Up Friday. Oh, I'm excited for tonight. Yes. If you are watching live, hashtag live. If you're watching the replay, I'd appreciate it if you give me a hashtag replay. First of all, I want to apologize to you guys. Man, we went, I don't even know what day it is out of the year. I know it's the 16th, but we went all those days. I didn't miss one day. And then yesterday, yo, what up, David? I appreciate you, man. I was away at a men's retreat, and I forgot to post the Throwback Thursday, so please forgive me. But I'm getting back on the saddle here, and we'll continue to move forward with the schedule and the regular post. So, if you're new to this channel, quick update. So this is kind of this is part of my calling, right? Because of the way I grew up, because of some of the struggles that I went through. Yeah, appreciate you too, man. Some of the struggles I went through. I can't sit around and watch the world go the way that it is without putting up a fight. I can't continue to watch men day after day lose hope, not understand what we're called to as fathers, husbands, brothers, leaders of our community, because we haven't been taught. In a lot of cases, we haven't been told about these things that used to be things that men talked about a lot in past decades for a multitude of reasons that I won't get into tonight, so we can keep this moving. But the theme tonight is, or every Friday night, is Man Up Friday. And the reason it's Man Up Friday is because I want to share with you guys lessons out of this course I went through that completely changed my life, and an encouragement to help you to step up and be the man that you're called to be, right? For your family, for your community, for your kids, all that good stuff. So all this comes out of this book by Dr. Robert Lewis. It's called The Quest for Authentic Manhood. And it rocked my world at a time where I needed it to, where I didn't know if I wanted to be married. I didn't know really who I was, what my identity was. I was in a pretty bad place, a tough place, and I needed somebody to reach down in this hole and say, hey man, I know what that's like. I've been there before. I got you. I'm going to help you. And that came through the brothers that I went through this course with. We were all at different points in our lives, but we were all very real and authentic with each other. And as we went through this material, which this material isn't easy, right? It challenges you. But I think that the majority of men, we want to be challenged. And for a lot of us, we don't get that type of challenge enough on our lives anymore because of the way society operates. So this helped pull me out of my funk, and it helped completely change the way that I approach my life going forward, because this stuff just isn't taught. You don't learn this stuff in school. The only way you find out about this stuff is through coincidence, or you somehow hear about it and you actively pursue it. So that's a good synopsis of what's going on here Friday night. So I invite you to join me. And we're going to pick up right where we left off last week. So let me share my screen and we can get started here. Alright, so this is part 4 of a biblical definition of manhood. And sorry about that. So as I explained in the weeks past, these are all iconic men from my life growing up, right? This is what society said manhood looked like. So in the upper left, you got Dirty Harry, played by Clint Eastwood. In this movie, I mean, he's a guy, if he wants something, he takes it, right? Even if it's by force. And that's what men were supposed to do. If we want something, we take it by force, or that's the way manhood was portrayed when I was growing up. Then we have Arnold Schwarzenegger in the middle, right, is just this physique. He's this Greek god. And men wanted to be like him so they could get the adoration of women. And he was the iconic symbol of power and masculinity. And then we have somebody who's more fitting of today, and that's The Rock, right? Men work hard, and once again we train our bodies, and we strive to become something better. And then we have Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player who ever lived, and he symbolized the will to never quit, to compete at the highest level, regardless of how you felt or what mood you were in. And he personified winning, right? Winning all these championships, stepping away from the game of basketball to try something else, and then coming back to his true love and dominating again, right? And then you had Sylvester Stallone, who played Rocky Balboa, a screenplay that he wrote himself, and then, if you don't know the backstory, negotiated his way to play the actor that no one wanted to give him that role, even in his own screenplay, but he made it happen, and he went on to crush it at the box office. But Rocky personifies, this underdog story, right? This nobody who became somebody through grit and toughness, in never quitting. So those are kind of some of the figures that I grew up in my life that portrayed manhood. So quick review from the weeks past. So men were created by God to be both social and spiritual leaders. In today's society especially, we've abandoned this call. And we've abandoned this, and when this pursuit is taken away from men, chaos ensues. And all you do is got to read the news headlines to see that, what's going on in the world, what's going on with all these different men that have been in the news lately, these power figures, Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weiss, I think was his last name, right? All these guys who were in these positions of power, and they abused it, right, to the nth degree, and they didn't steward that responsibility correctly, and it's given all of us men a bad stain. And it's not just them. This is something that's been built up over decades, and then as a result, women suffer, and then they got to fight for their equality and protection. And it's no reason that the feminist movement, or however you want to label it, is the way that it is today, because we've abused women, we've mistreated them, we haven't honored them the way that we've been called to honor them, and we're all guilty of this. Me on some levels as well. And then as another result, family life is harmed and children are hurt. Look at the divorce rates. Look at the percentage of single family or single parent homes, especially in America today, where boys are left to be raised by their mothers, and the dad is nowhere to be found. And that was my story, right? Dad was in and out of prison for the first 10 years, and then he'd wander back into our life and make big promises, and then he'd disappear just as fast as he came back. And it left me, emotionally scarred, afraid of abandonment, afraid of rejection, all these things that I had to learn to deal with, and look to God to help me to get over those things and fix those things. And thankfully that I came across this information, and it challenged me to look at those wounds that I had never faced before, and to decide to do something about them, and then go and do it. And then finally, as a result of all this, society breaks down because men don't take their rightful role they don't answer that calling that they have on their lives. And then secondly, every man lives under one shadow or another, and we went over this last week. And you either live under Adam's shadow or you live under Jesus' shadow. You know, Adam looked at what a man, or represented what a man does, where the character of Jesus represented what a man is. Right? We're not defined by what we do, the jobs we have, the houses we live in, the cars we drive. We're defined by our character, and integrity and truth, and grit, in doing the right thing at the right time. All those important traits: accepting responsibility, rejecting passivity, leaving a legacy, and investing internally. And then Adam, his character was also defined by competition with other men, whereas Jesus, he was defined by community with other men. Everywhere he went, he gave life. He invited other men into his journey with him because he knew how important it was for men to be a part of a community and to encourage each other and to hold each other to a higher standard. And then Adam's shadow was defined by temporal power, right? It wasn't lasting, whereas Jesus' power was transcendent, not only through who he was in his time and in his community, but even to this day, and what he represents. And then Adam's shadow represented his desire for personal rewards, what he could get out of life. Me, what he could acquire, what he could consume, whereas Jesus' shadow represented eternal rewards, right? What he could leave in other people, not what he accumulated and could leave behind, but what he could leave in other people that he would be remembered for and people would take and use to make their lives better. And that's what we're called to as men, to do that same thing. And then next, Adam's shadow is reflective of the self. That's all he cared about. Whereas Jesus' shadow reflected others. He put others first versus putting himself first. And I think this is the last one. Adam's shadow reflected success, right? What he could do in life, versus Jesus' shadow reflected significance, right? How was he going to be remembered? And what was he going to be remembered for after he was dead and gone? And a good exercise to do is to think about your life and what will people say about you when they're at your funeral? How will your kids talk about you when they remember you? So, right, we have the two shadows. One was about taking, and one was about giving. So let's jump into tonight. So the first two differences between Adam and Christ. The first Adam, he fell into passivity, right? He didn't do what he knew he should do. He just sat back and waited to see what happened. Whereas the second Adam, which was Jesus Christ, he rejected that passivity and he stepped into his calling and he accepted the responsibility that came with it, and then he went out and did what was required of him. And this is reflected in Genesis 3. And we've talked about this story. And that story is how Adam and Eve were in the garden that was created by God. And they were told not to eat the fruit of this one tree. And they understood that. And God told them that when they ate that fruit, they would know the difference between good and evil. And the serpent comes along in this story. And the serpent lies to Eve, right? He just ever so slightly twists the truth on his conversation with Eve and talking to her. And he convinces her that she can eat the fruit and she won't die and she will be just like God. And a lot of people are confused by this because they read the story or they think that Adam was off in some other part of the garden, when in reality Adam was right there. And he was watching this whole thing go down between his wife and the serpent. And instead of stepping up and stepping into that discussion to remind his wife of the truth, to protect his wife from the lie of the serpent, to intervene, to do something. He just sat back and watched this whole thing go down. And Dr. Lewis postulates that this is just conjecture of what was going through Adam's mind. And it was two things. One, if his wife eats the fruit and doesn't die, like God said, he'll still be able to reap the reward because he'll still have her. He'll still be able to know her deeply and intimately, like the Bible talks about, which is sex. So that was very selfish, right? And on the other hand, if she did die, right, because she did what she was told not to do, then it wouldn't be his fault. And how true is that story of men, right? Like, we don't do what we're supposed to do because then if we don't, we can fall back and say, okay, well, it wasn't our responsibility. Who said we had to do anything about it? And that's what Adam did. He rejected this responsibility. He sat back and let that happen, and he used his wife because in both cases he knew that he could get something out of it. And that's the way that a lot of men approach life, right? What can we get out of it by either manipulating the situation or sitting back and watching the situation unfold? So the first Adam, he disregarded his responsibilities, where the second Adam, which is Jesus, he accepted his responsibility. There's a quote by a famous writer, Roy Smith, and he said, "The ability to accept responsibility is always the measure of a true man." And I think that's very appropriate and something to remember, because as men, we're called to responsibility. I think about D-Day, right? I think that that's an amazing example in modern history of the measure of a man and his willingness to accept responsibility. And if you're not familiar with D-Day, that's the day where the Allied forces, I believe, invaded France. So if you imagine yourself, you're on this boat with all these other men around you, and you're about to go into war, and you know you're about to storm this land, this high ground, and you've been prepped for that, and you've been told that it's likely that you're not going to live, and you've been told that as soon as they're in this boat, so it's like it's called a U-boat, and they can't see anything around them, right? It's like one of those just dumpsters that you put out in front of a house, right? But only it's on the water and it floats, and obviously it's powered and steered and all that. But you know that in any second, the front of that boat, the gate is going to drop down, and you can hear the bullets whizzing, you can hear the enemy fire, and you're in that boat, and I gotta imagine, you could see the fear in some guys' eyes, you could see the blank stare in other guys' eyes, you could see the fronting that maybe some guys were doing by, acting like they weren't scared, but you knew when that gate dropped down that you had to run and charge as hard as you could. And you gave yourself to that calling, right? These men gave themselves to that responsibility, and there was no turning back, right? They either charged and got shot, they either charged and made it, or they stayed on the boat and got shot. They signed up for that, but those men accepted that responsibility, and they went for that. And because of that, we are here today, right? Because of that sacrifice that they paid and they served. It's incredible story, incredible sacrifice. The real measure of a true man. And second, he accepted responsibility. He accepted responsibility for a will to obey. Jesus realized that there was an authority over him, right? That there was a purpose higher than him, and he was willing to obey that purpose and obey that calling, right? And today in society, we have that same calling. We have that same calling as fathers. We have that same calling as husbands, and we have that same calling as members of our community. But a lot of us guys, we haven't been told this. And secondly, as we'll see, we also haven't been taught this. And I'm just trying to change that as best I can. So Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work." And you can see where that's found in John. My little screen's in the way, so I can't read it. And then secondly, this is from Psalms. Forgot the verse, my apologies, but it says, "I delight to do thy will, O my God, thy law is within my heart." And that reminds me of principles, right? What are the principles that you grew up as a kid? What was instilled in you? Not only what was instilled in you from your father or from those that you were surrounded by, but what principles did you instill in yourself? Did you say, "I'm going to live by this. I'm not going to break these"? And there were principles that were instilled in my life, but to be honest with you, for a good part of my life, I just winged it. And I never set principles for myself that I was not going to violate. I never took the time to think about that ahead of time. I just said, okay, I'll make them up as I go in the heat of the moment. And because I did that, I caused a lot of hurt to myself, and I caused a lot of hurt to others. Secondly, Jesus accepted responsibility for a work to do. And it says in John 17:4, "I glorified thee on earth, having accomplished the work in which thou hast given me to do." And then third, he accepted responsibility for a woman to love. And the Bible says, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her." Right? So if you don't know anything about Jesus Christ, right, he came to earth and he died for what he believed in and what he set out to accomplish, which was establish his church here on earth. So that's Ephesians 5:25. And that's important to us as men because this is a reflection of the headship that we're called to. And I'm going to beat this horse over and over and over and over and over again. And there is a clear difference between headship and leadership. Leadership is a gifting, something that God places in you. And he places that in both men and women. But headship is different. That is a calling. And that calling is only on men. It's only given to men. And if you want a good picture of what this looks like, there's a movie called Fury by Brad Pitt. And in this movie, Brad Fury is a tank commander. And he leads a 3-tank battalion. And they're going into this town on their way along their journey. And what they don't know about in this town, they're about to be ambushed. Now, the tank commander always rode in the very first tank with those guys. Then you had tank number 2 behind them and tank number 3 behind them. And the difference between tanks 2 and 3 and tank 1 is that the guys in tank 1 knew that if they got into a firefight, that one, it was their duty to draw the enemy fire so that tank 2 and 3 could escape. And secondly, those guys knew that more than likely they faced great odds of dying, and they were willing to sacrifice themselves so that tanks 2 and 3 could get away. And that's a picture of the headship that we're called to. We are supposed to lay down our lives and sacrifice ourselves for our wives and for our children. So we're called to love our wives, not to use them, not to abuse them, not to take advantage of them. To love them with our lives, and we're supposed to give ourselves to that. Think about this, right? think about the vows that you made when you were married. Had you ever thought about those vows up until that point? And more importantly, have you thought about those vows since that point? See, for a lot of us men, that's the only time that we thought about those vows, and that's the only time in our lives where we've made those vows. It's just a moment that we pass through on to the next thing. It's not supposed to be like that. It wasn't meant to be like that. And we got to get back to that. So now I want to ask a couple of questions because it's only fitting as we move into this next part. So, what causes a man to accept social and spiritual responsibility? First, when it's clear from a young age that the primary responsibility for the social and spiritual well-being of others, namely your wife and your children, are on him. And for reasons that I've talked about since the very first Man Up Friday, society has gotten away from that. And as men, we've been left to figure this out on our own. And in doing so, we've caused a lot of damage and harm along the way. So the goal of this, right, is to expose you to this and to have you think about this so you're no longer, like I was, ignorant to these facts, into this calling. And then you're invited to step into this calling and to change that. To start to talk about your sons, or to start to talk to your sons about these things. And to let them know from a young age that, hey, one day you're going to have your own wife. You're going to have your own family. And this is what's expected of you. This is the responsibility that comes with that. So we can start to change the way things are in society and from this world from being so freaking crazy. And I'll just repeat that. As a whole, we're not told, taught, or trained about this, or trained on this in today's society. And I ask this question all the time. If you go around and you ask, go to your 5 closest friends and ask them when they knew they became a man. And you'll get 5 different answers. When I smoked my first cigarette, when I slept with a woman for the first time, when I could pay my own bills, when I could take care of my family. All these different answers. Because in society today, there's no defining moment for a boy or a young man for when he steps into manhood. And this goes along with point 2, right? So when a man is honored, especially by other men, for accepting these responsibilities. So what's this look like? And I don't know if this has happened to you. When you see another man outside playing with his kids, and you come up alongside of him and you just say, hey, well done, Dad. That's awesome that you're taking the time to invest in your kids. Or you see another man out on date night with his wife, and you give him the head nod. Or you approach him and you say, well done, spending that time with your wife, cultivating that relationship. Or maybe you're spending time with a mentor. Like I remember a time when I was spending some good time with one of the guys I was mentoring, and another gentleman walked by and he just slipped a piece of paper on the desk and kept walking. And he opened up the paper and it had the verse from the Bible, iron sharpens iron. Right? He was encouraging us to continue to do what we were doing. And that's important, not only from men our same age, but from older men as well. And we have a responsibility to do that for the younger men that we know. And then finally, when he has been spiritually transformed on the heart by Jesus Christ, to desire these responsibilities in order to honor God. See, because this isn't just a physical responsibility. This is a spiritual responsibility and a spiritual calling as well. And one of the great things, and one of the honors of my life, was getting to be a part of this ceremony last night for men, where they were invited to step into this calling as fathers, as husbands, as leaders in their community, and to see these men culminate this week on this men's retreat in making that decision and deciding for themselves that when they go back to their families, that this is what they're going to start to, or this is what they're going to continue to walk out. For some of them, start to walk out like they've never been before. And I don't know if you're new to watching this series tonight, Man Up Friday with me. You know, this is an invitation to you as well to take these things that we're talking about here and to implement them into your life and decide that moving forward, you're going to accept responsibility for the things that you've been given stewardship over your lives, and to move forward in a way that honors not only that responsibility, but honors those people in your lives that you have responsibility over, but you also come in contact with on a daily basis. So I appreciate you guys checking this out tonight and being here with me for Man Up Friday. If there's ever anything that you need to talk about, you just need another brother to come alongside you who gets it, who's been there. I've heard it all from men. Nothing shocks me from things they feel shame about, things they feel guilty about, things that the enemy tries to beat them down with. So the only way for you to drop that off, to get rid of that, is to share that with somebody that you trust. So my hope for you is that you have somebody in your circle that you can trust with those things, and you can be open and honest with them and say, hey man, I just got to get this off my chest, and I got to tell you, this is what I'm dealing with. But if you don't have that person, I'd love to be that person for you and give you some feedback if you give me permission to, or just listen if that's what you need. So don't be afraid to reach out. I know that there's been times in my life where before I came to this maturity, that guys would offer the same thing to me, and I'd say, yeah, okay, cool, man, appreciate it. And then I'd never act on it. And then I'd find myself in trouble. And 9 times out of 10, even when I found myself in trouble, instead of putting down my pride and reaching out before the situation got worse, I just winged it and tried to figure it out and do it on my own. See, because the biggest lie that the enemy is going to tell you is that you're the only one who thinks what you're thinking. You're the only one who feels what you're feeling. You're the only one that's currently in this situation. I don't know what it is. Maybe your wife wants to leave you. Maybe you're about to get fired from your job. Maybe you're addicted to drugs. Maybe you're addicted to pornography. Whatever the case may be. The truth is that you're not the only person that's ever dealt with that. You're not the only person that's going through those type of things. But if you don't reach out and you don't talk to somebody that you can trust, you're going to continue to be dominated by that lie. Day after day, month after month, week after week, year after year. So don't be that guy, man. Don't listen to that BS. Get with somebody. Honor that decision. Share it with them. Leave it there. And then move on. And step into the greatness that God created you for. So I appreciate you guys. Thanks for tuning in. I love you. We'll see you tomorrow for the Saturday shout out. Have a good night.